Welcome to Own the Season podcast. We will talk to industry insiders along with outdoor enthusiasts to help you own your season. Now let's join hosts Art and Michelle Helen with Brad Jones. Own the Season podcast is sponsored by Griffin Armament, the oldest privately owned silencer manufacturer in the United States. Go to griffinarmament.com to learn how you can get a silencer shipped to your door. Griffin Armament, engineered silence.
Hello and welcome to Own the Season podcast. I'm Michelle Helen along with Art Helen and Brad Jones. And today, as we're, kind of stuck in winter but looking forward to spring, we are going to be talking about habitat management.
Yeah, right now is a great time to get out and start doing a lot of your habitat management, have your plans drawn up and, figuring out what you're going to do. And, there's so many things. Been doing this a long time on my own property and surrounding properties, helping people out. And then, it is part of my business. And so looking at all these properties and talking to so many people and listening to their expectations.
The landowners?
Yeah, like
expectations?
The landowners' expectations, because there's so many things out there, with YouTube and social media, and some of them can make it very believable.
So are you finding that the landowners that you talk to kind of are coming in with like some preconceived ideas and like, oh, I heard this, but what about this? And I heard this is the way to do it. Is that what's happening?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of them, they'll have 20, 30 acres, 40 acres, and they'll expect that they can do a plan and hold 200-inch deer. And, one of my first things when I sit down and talk to people before we go through these plans is, I want to know, what their expectations are. And I want to sit with them and explain, number one, these plans are made for long term, because you can't grow a 5-year-old buck or a 6-year-old buck in 1 year. It's absolutely impossible. And can you keep that deer on your property for, all 5 or 6 years on a 40-acre piece of property? Absolutely not. And if anybody tells you they can, they're lying to you. It doesn't happen.
What happens instead? Tell people like what happens.
Well, I was fortunate to be part of the collar program here in the state, so I got to see a lot of data on how deer moved and where they went. And as deer get older, yes, their home range shrinks. Their home range shrinks a lot. And you can keep them, but that 40 acres might be on the edge of their home range. So what you need to do, you need to make your property the best property around for them to spend more time there. But they won't spend their entire life there, especially when they're 2 and 3 years old. They're going to move and they're going to travel a long ways. I remember looking at some of the data of these nubbin bucks that had been born, and what we found out or through this was, if that doe was not killed during season and she was still alive, when she had her next offspring the next year, she would have her, fawns, and she would kick those nubbin bucks out. Now, if she had doe fawns, they would stay with her. But the bucks, because of probably genetics or interbreeding, things like that, Mother Nature just made it that they would disperse. Some of those deer would disperse. The farthest one I ever remember was 27.2 miles. And,
wow.
Yeah, that was a long ways.
Yeah.
But that deer actually came back. That was the farthest it went, but it made its home range about 12 to 13 miles, I believe it was, away from where it was born. That deer lived to be 3 years old and then was killed by a hunter. Now, some of the deer that don't disperse that far what they were finding out was these deer would, if mom was then killed during the rut, they might come through and they would not find mom. And so they would actually stay and they would come back to their home ranges when they were 2-3 years old. That wasn't a lot of them, because the other big, myth here in Wisconsin is, these deer are going to live to be 4, 5, 6 years old if I do this to my property. No matter what, how much work you put in, how much, time, money, you need to sit back and be realistic. You need to think about the predators, the diseases, CWD, EHD. You've got wolves in the northern part. You've got bears. You have bobcats and coyotes. And, then when you get outside of the predators, you have, cars and hunters and human beings. Yet the normal for Wisconsin, most of these deer don't make it past 2.5 years old. They just don't. So you have to keep that in the back of your head, that it's very difficult to get that deer to 5 or 6 years old. And if you do, you've accomplished something.
Mm-hmm. So realistic expectations. And then you just listed off a handful of things that are outside of our control. Or limitedly control. I mean, we're not going to get into predators today, predator management. But that then brings us to the habitat management and doing things that we can as landowners, or even leasing land if you have if you have permission from the landowner and some ability to do some things on the land. So, what things are most important, or where does somebody start?
Wow. Everybody, I think, focuses very hard on food. I know Brad was very good, or is very good. Unfortunately, he lost his one hunting spot, but Brad is very good on food plots, on where to put them, what to put in, and things like that. So, I'm going to have Brad kind of touch base on, the food sources and what he did and what he looked for and how much work that was. And then we'll come back to, the timber management and water and stuff like that. So, Brad, do you want to fill us in there?
Perfect. Yeah. I've spent hours and hours and hours planting different species and stuff in the area I hunt, and came up with some, pretty good mixes that worked in the area. You need to experiment a little bit. One of the things that I always started off with was clover. Comes up early, a lot of protein. You can mix those clover blends up. So you have different ones maturing at different times. Even put in some other things like chicory or alfalfa with those. And by doing that, you're going to diversify your food plot. So if it gets warm and stresses, some of the deeper rooting plants will continue to grow. So you'll have something. And then I plant a lot of stuff for fall and into the winter for emergency food sources. So I start with that, and then I look at placement, where I want to put them. I like my clover blends. I definitely put plots by where I believe that the does are bedding in, so they don't have to go far. When in spring, when they're having their fawns, they can come out, eat, go back, and when they're lactating, have plenty of protein in there, and it'll help the fawns. Then when I move in for my hunting plots, we know we can't compete with the big ag fields. So my strategy is to plant something between where I think the mature bucks are bedding and where their destination plot is. Let's say there's a 100-acre soybean field a mile away from you. I try to put something in between so when they get up, they'll snack, come over into that little plot and snack. And that way you get an opportunity to maybe get a crack at one. I know a lot of people like to plant real big food plots. Me, for South Central Wisconsin, I have not had much success with that. Plots get too big. Deer get super skittish in them, is what I found. So if I do a little larger, like a 2-acre plot, I'll break it up with something tall, maybe in the middle, checkerboard it, so the deer feel more comfortable coming out during daylight and feeding in them. And that's my biggest strategies. It's not rocket science, but remember when you're doing your food plots, do the basics. Soil test, that's going to tell you everything you need to know. How much fertilizer, how much lime you need to put in. Is the soil even compatible for the seed that you're going to plant? Is the soil compacted? I know a lot of guys are into this no-till stuff, but it's an expensive venture. So I was always a light tiller. Just till the soil very lightly on top, broadcast in, and cultipack. And most of the seeds that you're planting, unless you're going corn or soybeans, they don't need to be that far into the ground. Some of them you can actually broadcast right over top. I'll do that if I do put in like corn or soybeans, I'll go back late summer and put broadcast brassicas in them. And all they need is a good rain, and they'll push into the cracks and stuff in the soil and just give you a little bit more feed for that emergency food source during winter.
Yeah, I think
that's my take.
Yeah, because like Art said, you're not gonna keep all the deer, and the more that we can provide them with a year-round food source, or get them traveling through, like you said, if they're going from bedding to a destination plot, and someplace where the does are going to want to be year-round, so that the bucks will follow them during the rut. Diversifying is the way to go, I think.
Yeah, I always try to work a little bit of water in too if I can. Put a little water source on the edge of the plot, so when they come off, they can grab a drink or go back and forth, vice versa.
Yep. Yeah, and I agree with you 100% on what you're looking at. Especially getting your soil test, doing things, because a lot of people waste a lot of money on seed and a lot of time, out tilling or out working the soil, doing these things, and then nothing grows. So you have to look at that. Right now we're looking at frost seeding, and, at the same time you can get out there and, do some lime and fertilizer, right away this spring, get it in there, so that frost will, make that work too. And so a couple things that I do on top of what, Brad does is, if I'm making the smaller ones, but let's say a 2-acre or 1-acre food plot, on the edges, I'm looking for more of a shade tolerant blend, closer to the stands, closer to areas, because I want those, to grow and give the most protein. And then, like Brad said, you checkerboard it or you layer it, as I say. Now you might have on something that big some brassicas, and then you get into your corn or beans. My personal is, if I'm doing that in a hopper, I will, there's some rack fuel blends that I will use. And if I'm not using those, because the soil tests and things come back not right, I will use corn, beans, and sorghum. I will put them all in the hopper together and run those, as my tall to make edges. Deer like to run edges. So you like to make that edge maybe at that 30 yards, or 35 yards out from your stands or out from the, and have your clovers maybe run 20 yards out, and then for 10 yards all the way around that, you're going to run your brassicas for later on. That's going to be your fall blend that you're going to come in and plant, later on. But then you have that mix, and then when you do that brassica mix, I don't just do that 10 yards. I want to do the 10 yards on each side of the corn, beans, and sorghum, and then I also want to go right down the middle of that, and I want to overseed that whole area with those brassicas. Because once they're done with that corn and beans and sorghum, now I want them to have those greens. I want them to have that green. The green is the protein. Corn they eat, there's not a lot of, they like it, but there's, not a lot of protein in that corn for them. And actually, if you're not doing food plots, this is one thing for people to think about in not only other parts of the country, but, northern Wisconsin, Minnesota, some of these places that don't have ag fields, and these deer are not used to eating corn. Corn is not in their diet. I listen to guys freak out all the time when winters start getting hard and snow starts getting deep, and they're like, I'm going to go start dumping corn for my deer. Don't do that. What happens is, there's other ways that I'll get into here about how to, help those deer get through winter, or help all wildlife get through winter. Because if you go out there and start dumping corn, and it is not in their diet, what will happen is a deer will get what's called acidosis, and that deer will starve to death thinking that it's full. It will get this and it'll eat that corn. That corn will fill them up, and it's not really filling them up. It's not giving them the protein they need, but it makes them feel bloated and gives them an acid feel. That's acidosis, and then they just end up dying from it. So don't go out and do that. Look at other ways.
Well, and just quickly, and then you can get the other way is to go cut down a couple trees.
That's, yeah.
And leave them lay. And then that'll kind of get in. But, because it is winter right now, so let's just say that's what that is. So if you're like, oh my gosh, I got to give the deer something to eat. We've got this, huge snowfall and they can't reach the ground, or we got ice. They can't get through. Go out and drop a couple trees. Give them some browse.
Yeah. And that's, that's where we're going with, food is a very important part of this for deer, for all wildlife. The next part of this is you're going to get into when you're managing habitat, you have to manage your forest. You have to manage the undergrowth. You have to manage your trees, your junk trees for good trees. And whether if you know it or you don't understand forestry, there's a ton of programs out there and a ton of ways to learn, or you spend a little extra money with the plan that you have drawn up and you have a forester come in and mark those trees. So like if I come in and do a plan, I'm saying, okay, this needs to be a bedding area, or this needs to be thickened up. This area here is, non-productive, so it might need burns done in here. There's a lot of different things that go into it. So, they come in and mark those trees, and now is when you need to be cutting those. And there's a couple ways to do that. One, there's, the YouTube famous and everything famous hinge cutting, which
it has its place, but
yeah,
I think
absolutely.
Your opinion is that it's more limited than what a lot of people tend to do.
It is. I think it's a quick fix. We have to remember this is a long-term plan. It's
how long? So when you think of a habitat management plan, or you work one up for a customer, what is the time frame, the length, duration of that plan usually?
I tell most people you're looking at 5 to 10 years is what you should really think about for doing this for yourself, because it is a lot of work and you can only do so much. You only have so much time to cut so many trees or to do different things.
Yes and no. Most people, yes. Like the average Joe, average person, yes. There's only so much time and money, both,
right,
to do this work. So it's more budget friendly to spread that out.
Right.
The other piece that you've hinted at earlier, and that you talk about is you can't grow a 5-year-old deer in 1 year.
Right.
You know, so like to see results in the timber stand management, you know, and as well as just age structure, it's going to take a while. You have had some customers who have not quite unlimited resources, but enough money, and they had people nearby with equipment and, you know, people that they could hire to do everything in 1 year.
Right. And I don't like that. I don't want it done in 1 year. And
Talk about that maybe.
And the reason you don't is when you do everything, all your timber stand improvement, whether it's hinge cutting, whether it's TSI work, which I'll get into the TSI here in a minute over hinge cutting, what happens is everything regrows at the same rate everywhere on your property. So because of that, now you're right back to where you began as far as now I have to do this work again. And, you know, when I have to do TSI work, where maybe one part of your property needs a little more work than the next because it's growing a little faster, or maybe it was logged years ago. So that is what you want to concentrate on, making that your thicker, your bedding area, or it's your most difficult area to get to. So why make your entire property that way when you can look at, okay, I'm going to do this section first because this helps me for my bedding areas and what I need to do, and now I can kind of make a plan around this. And then I can work farther on a different section of the land in 2 years down the road.
So I'm just going to say that I've got property and I've hired you to come in and look at that property and work up a plan for me. Is it mostly the TSI and TSI and bedding and sanctuary work that is most important to spread out over 5 or so years? Could I do, if I have the whole plan in front of me and you've helped outline where the food plots should be and what should be in them and maybe some water sources, could I knock out and do like all of that year one?
You can.
Okay.
Do I suggest it? No. One of the first things that I always look at is I'll tell people, I don't care, you know, how good you develop this property. I don't care what kind of timber stand improvement you do to this, the water sources. You can make the best property in the world on paper. Okay, you can make it look like you will hold, you know, 200-inch deer or grow 200-inch deer, which, let me say, I started out, you know, way back in this podcast talking about 200-inch deer. The other thing as far as realism that I tell people, a lot of that is genetics, guys. It's not age. People sit there and think, well, if I grow a 6-year-old deer, I'm going to have a bunch of booners running around. Guys, even 6-year-old deer, your oldest deer, you know, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old deer, very few of them will make your Boone and Crockett class. They very seldom do. Certain areas will when you give them everything. But, you know, the way that we look at it, if I have, and some people think I'm wrong, but the way that I do it on my place, if I have a 5-year-old 140-inch deer, 120-inch deer, I would rather myself or one of the hunters on my property shoot that deer than killing a 140 or 150 inch 3-year-old deer. That 3-year-old is your potential booner. The problem is, as I stated earlier, you have predation, you have disease, you have all this. It's a choice that you make as a landowner, as a hunter, to let that deer walk. You also have to be extremely ready for disappointment, because that deer may die, another hunter may shoot it, something might happen, and then all of a sudden your hopes and dreams, you need to move on to the next one. It happens, guys. It's no matter what you do, you can't control Mother Nature. You can do your best doing all the things that we're talking about. But now back to this, no matter what your property looks like on paper, I don't care, how good it looks. It all comes down to ingress and egress. How you get to and from your tree stands, how you pay attention to the wind, and things like that. So when first thing I do when I look at a piece of property is I want to look at how am I going to get to these spots. So if it looks on paper that this is a great place to put a food plot or a great place to put a water hole or something like that, but you have no way to get there to hunt, then it's not good, because all you're doing is educating all the deer, especially on 20, 30, 40 acres. So, as Michelle said, what can you do? The thing is, the main things are food and your forestry. Because when you look at the forestry, you can develop that to get into those. And once you've changed that and said, okay, now I've done all my TSI work or my timber stand improvement, now it is turning into a bedding area. Now, because of where I put that, now the deer are starting to use that. Now I can see, okay, this is what's working on this plant. Now I can put in my food and water back by that area. Before you may have that and you're drawing deer out and not letting it mature enough over the next 2-3 years before you can actually get in there to hunt it. And what happens is once you put that stuff in there, I know for a fact, because I've seen it a million times, is a big deer shows up because you have a water source back there. And that big deer shows up on that water source. Instead of drawing it to a different water source that you already have on your property or a different food source before the other is mature and that plan starts kicking into effect, now all of a sudden you see the pictures of that deer and you freak out. And now you start invading that territory and putting pressure on that animal, and that animal moves. And if you only have 40 acres, that deer might move to the neighbors. He might move, 2 neighbors over. You don't know where they're going to go to, but where there's no pressure. The older the deer, the less pressure you need to put on them. Okay, and I've always said this with, as parents. When you're younger, you can always tolerate stuff. So, when you're younger is when you're usually having your children. So when those kids come home, you want to sit and listen to them and whine and whatever about their teachers and their friends and blah, blah, blah. And you can tolerate that. That's no different than these, 2-3-year-old deer. They can tolerate that 1-year-old buck, being kind of whatever. And then all of a sudden they start getting a little more mature, and you're more mature. They get into high school and you're like, you know what? Deal with it yourself. I don't want to deal with it, and you want to, go somewhere else. It's like, let the kids, be kids amongst themselves, and I want to, shift to the man cave, or I want to just, get away from them for a while. Then pretty soon you get to be, older, so you're looking at that 5-6-year-old buck. He doesn't want to deal with any of that stuff. So what do? If that kid keeps bothering them, they get up and they leave. It's just like us, it's like, I got to go for a ride tonight in the car. I got to get away from, all this stuff, and you leave. It's no different. That's what these older bucks do. So you have to create those areas, and that's what I'm talking about by creating these bedding areas with your TSI or your hinge cutting. again, hinge cutting, the big difference between the two is
hinge cutting and stump cutting.
right.
I mean, TSI is TS Timber Stand Improvement. Right. We're talking about now about like different ways to cut the trees.
Right.
Yeah.
So yes, TSI is a stump cut, where you cut that in the winter like this, pretty close to as flush to the ground as you can, maybe 2 inches out of the ground. And what happens is the like if you have certain oak trees or you've got not really maples because that's, they're not really feeding on those, but whites and blacks and, some of your more desirable deer food trees. What you do is you cut those if they're stunted, if there's something wrong with them, they're growing crooked, they're not going to be a loggable tree down the road. You cut that and then just let that drop and fall. What happens is because those trees bud before winter, and so the deer use that instantly for food. Once that's on the ground, and as Michelle was saying earlier, instead of dumping that corn, this is where you cut those trees down. And so when you're doing that timber stand, you cut that tree down, they eat those buds. But what happens then is now that tree is on the ground, but that stump, when it comes back to life in the spring, all of a sudden says, what happened? The rest of me is gone, so it'll stump sprout. Now you'll get all kinds of stump sprouts coming out of there. And when you get all those, you might get 8, 10, 20, 30 stump sprouts, depending on the size of the tree. That's browse for these animals. And the strongest one will survive. The strongest trees out of there that don't get eaten, they will be the ones that will grow down the road and become your new forest. In the meantime, they grow this, and so it also lets light to the ground, so everything gets thicker, nastier around it to protect those trees. That's Mother Nature's way of protecting those. So you're instantly creating food, you're instantly creating bedding areas. Okay, that's what I like about that, where hinge cutting, if done properly, is great. The biggest issue with it is, especially in the northern part of Wisconsin, or even in southern Wisconsin, what happens is if you get a big snow load on that tree and you go in and you cut that tree and you cut it too far, then what happens, instead of doing what it's supposed to do, because when you do that, that's what's supposed to happen too. That tree will then fall over. It has all its buds. That tree will stay alive on the ground for a while. The stump will then sprout. Okay, even at 4 or 5 feet tall, creating bedding area and food instantly again. The problem is if you don't do it right, and that's why TSI is so much easier, and that's why I push that a lot more, is because then snow will get in there, freeze and thaw, and it'll push that and it'll break that piece off that you cut to lay over to grow. Now you've damaged that tree enough, it more than likely won't even stump sprout anymore. And so you've got nothing but dead stuff laying all over the forest.
And I think also a temporary barrier to try to push or direct deer travel temporarily.
Right.
I think that's another reason where I see people using that is to block a trail.
Definitely.
Block a corridor and create a new corridor.
Yeah. And I do that.
That's where I've found it most effective. If you're trying to direct the deer to a certain place and you just can't do it, and you have a decent tree you can drop, that's the only time I've ever used it, to be truthful.
Yeah, I've used it and asked people and put it in plans for people when they need to make a barrier for ingress and egress so they can get in to certain areas without being seen, and to work their way around it. I've also had clients that don't want to do that I've actually seen them come in with a fencing company and build big fences. And to steer deer, to cut off those deer trails and steer them one way or another. And
That's one way to do it.
It is. And I just kind of giggle about that. And I'm like, they're like, well, will a fence work? I'm like, oh, sure it'll work, but man, that's a ton of work to be bringing in a fence. And
expensive.
It is. And I had a guy come in, and I've got this guy that I helped him on his, and man, he hired a fencing company to come in and put, these big 10-foot high fences and, to steer deer here and there. And he would actually put them along some of the borders of his neighbor's property. And you can, it's legal, you can do it. But I think sometimes that just going out and doing the right, cut down, hinge cut these trees, or do your timber stand improvement, because you're going to change those deer patterns either way. And but if you want that quick fix, why they are growing, hey, you take snow fence out there and you put snow fence up. It's not that expensive. You can go between a couple trees with some snow fence, put it 10 feet high and put it for 30 yards and, move them while you're trying to, get that barrier to grow naturally, and then take that thing back down. So, there's a million different ways to do that, but timber stand improvement, and now is when you're out there trying to do that. And that has just been a proven, if you work with loggers, if you work with foresters, like I have in the past, that is, their number one way also of improving habitat. But again, work with somebody.
You're creating a healthier forest as well, right, Art?
Right, exactly. And that's what you're doing. You are creating that, because not all the trees, there's a lot of junk trees, and when you cut those, you don't want those to stump sprout. So what you do is you treat those. There's different treatments out there for different trees, and you spray that sprout, or you spray that stump, and it'll kill it completely. That way what happens is that dying, as the sun hits the floor around it, you'll get regrowth of everything else that has been sitting in that soil forever, that hasn't been able to, because that bad tree has been sucking up all the nutrients and growing without it. So, that is the thing. You're creating a healthier habitat and a better habitat for all animals.
Yeah, I think we've had our land in forestry plan for many, many years. We just had to have a new one done. I think our plan had expired. Had to have a forester come out and take a look, walk the place. I think he marked trees again. So we got some work to do out there. And one thing too I wanted to say, when they come out to our place, they'll also mark trees that they recommend that you not cut down, but that you just girdle. And I think that from what I can remember, there's like two reasons that they might be marked that way. One is that there's some desirable but still kind of young trees, maybe fragile, if you would, trees around it. And we don't want to drop this, larger tree onto those other trees and break them or damage them. And another is sometimes the trees are just so big, it might be like bordering on dangerous for us amateurs, if you will, to cut them down. And so just for a safety reason, some trees just might be better to not try to fell. So then we girdle them, yep. Right? And we're, cutting through the bark. Usually we do like two circles around the tree, 4 inches apart, 4 to 5 inches apart, something 4 to 6 inches apart. And then those trees gradually die. 5 years maybe down the road, 6 years.
Yeah, some of them, within
Probably
a
depends
year,
on the
year and a
size of the
half,
tree.
depending on the size.
Before they fall. Like, they might kind of start to die,
Oh,
but they fall.
We've got some that are 15, 16
They
years
still
old that are
standing?
still
You
standing.
still see them, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and what we have out there, because then we have a lot of dead standing trees too, because then they might die, the bark falls off, but depending on the wind and how much rain we have and all those things, I guess too, that contribute to them getting falling over. But we have like every species of woodpecker,
right? And we never used to.
that is in southern Wisconsin, in abundance. I would say we've got all kinds of woodpeckers out at our place, and owls. Yeah. We've got a lot. Including some nesting owls down there. Bluebirds. Our neighbor gets more bluebirds because we don't really have like an open area. We occasionally see some bluebirds kind of flying through, but we are. There's an abundance of squirrels and raccoons, which we're trying to put a dent in. But it is more than just habitat for deer. It's definitely creating that better forest and habitat for all the animals.
Oh, 100%. And that's, when you look at it, that's why they say habitat management. It's for the whole ecosystem, and a stronger, better ecosystem gives, better, stronger wildlife, healthier wildlife, and healthier habitat. And, I never really knew much about burns, things like that. On my lease, sometimes I get a little frustrated because when the burns have to be done, and
we're still debating if
yeah,
they really have to be done.
Yeah,
the week
they do.
before
I've looked them up.
Season.
Yeah, I've looked them up,
and I'll get that phone call.
Yep.
That's what they're doing today. I'll know exactly what's going on.
And it's very frustrating. It's frustrating for my neighbors. It's frustrating for me. But some of it, I would not, if it was me, I would not do those burns as large as they do. They're looking for something completely different than I am, but I do not own that property. It's a lease, and so I have to just deal with it and go with the flow. However, because of the burns they do and the habitat they are creating there, it has turned that into a turkey paradise. Which I think that's another thing that people need to look at when you're doing this habitat management. We have focused on deer for so long, and now everybody is starting to say, hey, you know what, our turkey population is starting to diminish. There's things, and there's a lot of ways to help it, but burns are one of them in certain areas, for their nesting habitat, for their food resources. Burns are very good for that. So you need to look at that. And that's one thing when I look at these plans is I look at, again, your TSI, where you're going to be doing that. And with your TSI, you're creating your bedding areas, you're creating your travel routes, and you're also creating some open areas because, a lot of people don't realize too that if you have east-west running ridges, south side is going to be your bedding side. So, your north side is your bedding side in summer months because it's cooler. But the thing is you want that as a more open area than you do on the south side. Your south side, you want thermal bedding. So there's ways to create that. And I look at all that stuff. You look at, again, those burns, how to get in and out of your properties, your food sources, but one of the biggest, I think, overlooked things of all habitat management is water and water placement. I hear so often, I've got a creek on my property, or I have, a river that runs through it. The thing is I was fortunate to be able to work with one of the best aquatic biologists in the state of Wisconsin for a few years, as far as going over, a lot of different studies on why deer do certain things with water. And, that gentleman taught me so much. And then I've got another friend who does, habitat management now, also in a different part of the state, and he is an aquatic biologist. And so I bumped things off of him too. And, he is working with the EH Defense Systems right now, trying to, get that product out to keep your water cleaner and better for your health of the herd, and help reduce the risk and help reduce it extensively as far as EHD goes. So, working with these guys, I've been able to know just enough to somewhat be dangerous in the water department. And I've, and I've learned that, a creek, the problem with creeks and rivers is usually they are at the lowest part of your land. So they're very difficult to hunt, number one, because of the wind swirl, because of the way the winds travel. The other thing is deer are not comfortable. If that's the only water, they will have to. But if you ever watch a deer drink out of a creek or a river, their head is always bobbing. They're always nervous. Because once they put their head down, they can't hear anymore. They can't smell once that nose is underwater, So they become very skittish, very jumpy. And so it's very, hard to hunt those. And again, they aren't getting the best quality of water because it's running so much downstream.
It looks good to us.
Oh yeah,
right?
Looks good
I
to
think
us.
that's like we all think. Well,
Right.
that's in a cleaner, clearer water when it's moving.
Yep.
But that's not necessarily what deer are after.
Right. And deer are, they're after what I don't want to say a stagnant pond, but if you want to say a stagnant pond. And the nice thing with those is if you build them correctly, there's a lot of new pre-built ponds, if you want to say, liners, things like that have come a long ways from a plastic tub. Plastic tubs, if you're using some of the old school ones, or rubber roofing liners, those things actually end up being bad for the deer because of all the chemicals that are in those and actually leach into that water over time. So they're not good for them. So you might see deer there for a while, but then all of a sudden that deer traffic really starts to slow up. Nowadays, it's changing. You're starting to see the technology in these tubs, if you want to call them tubs, or ponds, preformed ponds. You're seeing a different technology in it so that problem is not happening, and so you're getting that cleaner water, and you can put those anywhere you need them. So when you look at that plan, you say, all right, now I have my food source here, I have my bedding source here, I've got a travel corridor. Now my stand has to go here. So guess what? Now I can put that water source on my upwind side. I can put that water source where I need it to be. Not necessarily where they want it, but where I need it. So you can go in there and build these water sources. And that is the most essential thing that a deer needs, as far as I believe, over food, water. It does need its cover, but over food, it needs its water. They drink an exorbitant amount of water per day during the rut. And if they're not getting it on your property, where are they going to get it? If it's not raining, if there's no moisture, where are they going? So you got to think about that. You build that water source for them, and then you keep that water source clean. One thing, if you are using those smaller tubs, some of the new ones are fine, but if you're using a smaller tub, one thing to do is make sure you put a log in it, a piece of something in there, so that when your squirrels or your mice or something like that falls in there, they have a way to get out so they don't rot in your water and, make your water stagnant. I personally like digging my ponds a little bit bigger. I like that 15 by 15 to 20 feet by 20 feet. And I like to get that 4 to 5 feet deep depth out of it. Once I get to that, what happens is you start getting turnover, just like in a lake. It'll freeze, and usually it'll freeze all the way to the bottom. Sometimes it doesn't, but if it does, what it does is it pushes all those natural minerals and stuff that are in that soil or that have run down into there. So in the spring, what happens when that thaws and all that fills up, that pond fills up, now as that water temperature starts to rise, and it gets to a certain degree, now that turns over just like a lake. So the top of it will be green and slimy and whatever and look horrible. But what that is that's all that protein and minerals that are sitting there. Now they turn over and flush themselves out. And because once it comes up, hopefully you get enough rain that'll wash all that off. If you built that pond right, that'll go to your natural overflow. And now you have fresh, clean water that the deer like, and that's much healthier for them. Now you treat it with your EH Defense stuff, and you're that much farther ahead. So now you've given them all your elements. You've given them the food, the water, and the bedding area, and their travel routes that need to get from point A to point B. You're giving them everything they need. And so then, like I said, the last thing you look at is your ingress, egress. Actually, that's one of the first things you look at. But now that you have all these other things in place, you can start developing those and building them. But again, work on certain things. And if, you look at that with a habitat manager, somebody who's drawing up a plan, whether it's me or somebody else, there's a lot of great people out there that do this. But whoever you're working with, make sure to ask them a million questions. Make sure to understand that ingress and egress and what the long-term plan is and what you should look at first. What should I be doing first? And then when should I develop this? Because again, you do it all at once. It's not going to work. The plan's not going to work the way that a lot of people have it developed, because most of us are trying to develop it again for that long term. A bedding area over here this year, a bedding area over here, for different winds, different things. We're trying to look at that and create those things so that over time, now you've developed that perfect property for what size you have. It may not, hold your booner like you hope, but hopefully that booner shows up there more than on the neighbors. And once you've got that developed, the nice thing is now 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road, you can start as far as the timber stand improvement goes, for the undergrowth, the trees and stuff. Your ponds and food will stay there. Your food might change year to year or every so many years, but now all of a sudden you can start developing those woods again. Once they become mature and they need timber stand improvement again, now you know where to start, and you can start that whole process again over the next 4 or 5 years to develop that. And so you're creating that long-term effect for not just, the next 10 years, but for the next 20, 30 years, actually.
So you should have like a long-term goal, a short-term goal, and then there's certain times of the years that you can only work on certain parts of it, correct?
Exactly.
And that's important for people to remember. You're not going to do your timber stand improvement in the middle of summer, are you?
No. And to have people even draw up a plan, you don't want them coming out in the summer because they can't see anything. You can't really see those dips and the way the habitat lays right now, especially with, some of these things, the Spartan Forge technology. We use Spartan Forge for our mapping, and you look at their LiDAR mapping systems now, and man, you put that together plus boots on the ground, it's absolutely incredible what can be done anymore. So, yeah, there's certain times, and the other thing is there's a lot of states, especially Wisconsin, where you have to look at the regulations because due to like oak wilt, there's certain times in the state that you're not allowed to cut oak trees down.
Right.
You know, and you get caught and you get in a lot of trouble.
Well, it's better for a lot of them to, be cutting things during dormancy, too. So I think we've covered the key components of habitat, right? We talked about food first. We talked about cover and TSI. We talked about water.
Burns.
We hit a little bit on burns. If somebody wanted to talk with you about hiring you to look at their property and do a plan, what's the best way to reach you?
There's a million ways to reach me. Actually, through social media on our Own the Season TV page, Instagram, Own the Season TV. But the best is probably just send me an email. I've actually got my own Facebook too, Art Helen. You can send me a message on any one of those, or Art at Art Helen Outdoors. It's ARTHELIN Outdoors.com. Send me an email, and would love to chat with you about things. We're, like I said, gearing up, and it's getting to be that time of year. Already had a few so far this year that looking at some different things with a few people. So it seems like that season never ends, but this is the best time to be doing plans and stuff. But
right,
I mean,
the best time for the plans.
It is, because wildlife, habitat, things like that, habitat and wildlife management is a 24/7, 365 gig. It never ends, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Well,
another great way is for people to come out to the consumer shows that you guys are going to be at, and they come out and chat with you, get to know you a little bit. You can know them. They can maybe show you some things in their property and put something together for them, right?
Exactly. Yeah, we've got for the bigger shows coming up. Well, we'll be down actually. It's a smaller show, but Richland Center, Wisconsin has Driftless Area Deer Classic. It's a one-day show coming up here the 21st of February. And then we've got the Wisconsin Bowhunters Association State Convention. I'll be doing a seminar on habitat, actually. And then I'll be the keynote speaker there. And then we have Ohio Open Season Sportsman Expo. I think that's like the weekend of the 22nd of March, I believe. And then we have the Wisconsin Open Season Expo in the Dells. And so we'll be at all those with a booth or speaking, and swing by and chat. Love to chat with you and see what we can do.
All right. We'd love to see you. And it is the time to be thinking about habitat management. If you've got property that you own or have the ability to do some work on, now's the time to get out there so you can own the season.
Follow Own the Season Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. Thanks for listening.
Check back weekly for new episodes.